Thank you very much. Thank all of you. And now we will now begin the 5-minute rounds of questions for each member. And I will begin with my own now. Mrs. Cox, currently states allow SNAP mostly to do what they fit. I'm concerned about proposals to limit this. My own state of Pennsylvania has the ability to seek waivers on work requirements and times, and depending on employment metrics. This also includes tools to ensure that low-wage working household avoiding a benefit cliff. Can you possibly explain the potential impact if these proposals would have on states?
Yes, thank you for the question. So when we think about the waivers, I think while unemployment has come down across the country, there are still areas that have higher unemployment, and so it can, and states have each state has experienced some crisis, whether it's a natural disaster, plant closing, some community conditions that have persistent high unemployment, specifically like in Native American communities. And so that means people can't find jobs where these waivers are needed. States can only request temporary waivers for areas with relatively high unemployment and a lack of sufficient jobs. And states are really in the best position to evaluate the needs of their communities. And so that's why it's really critical to maintain states' flexibility when you respond, so that they can respond to their communities' needs. And then on the other hand, around flexibilities, for example, the asset limit, the broad-based categorical eligibility, a lot of states that have expanded the income limit, it's basically for working families. So families who are just above the poverty line, but because of high shelter or childcare costs, at the end of the day, they meet the eligibility for SNAP and they're able to receive benefits. So taking that away, we saw when the Trump administration sought to pursue these reforms, it was going to estimate 3 million individuals were actually going to lose SNAP. So when you look at income, asset limit, so that mostly impacts older adults who have modest savings. So we would be asking them to not be able to have a savings in order to get SNAP. And so that, the state's flexibility is super important because states are in the better position to tell what they need in their state.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Cox. And I'd actually have one more kind of a brief, another question, please. Many SNAP households have had benefits stolen through skimming. Victims face the serious challenge of losing their purchase power. When debit cards are skimmed, they are protections for the cardholder. What needs can be done to ensure that families have that same kind of being protecting?
Right. So there's been a lot of skimming over the last few years. And so what's really important is that SNAP participants have the same consumer protections that everyone else has. If you have a debit or a credit card and you have protections for your purchases, the same should happen for EBT card users. I do want to say I appreciate the quick action of Congress to restore stolen benefits, and that's over the next year or so. But we really want to make sure that any new EBT protections and technology doesn't prevent participants from having access to their benefits. So I don't know if there's one particular solution. There may be a few. It could be chip card technology, improving the detection and elimination of some of the skimming devices that are in stores, training retailers. But ultimately, we want SNAP EBT card holders to not be treated any differently than other consumers in our, any less protections than other consumers. Thank you.
Mrs. Jones-Brown, food banks are really critical for the support foundation of SNAP. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
The Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP, was established to provide emergency food assistance to low-income individuals. And these individuals may not qualify for SNAP, but they might need additional support. Food banks, like Phil Abundance, and knowing personally the kind of quality of the work that you do in my own state, they distribute 85% of TFAP foods nationwide. As Americans struggle with high food costs, how have you been able to allow you to continue to provide food support?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And the reality is that food banks like Philabundance, our partners across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and really across the country, we heavily rely on the government food programs that support farmers across this country that also end up supporting us, enabling us to ensure that our neighbors get access to the food that they need. And often it's produce that the folks are asking for. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that as inflation has increased and there have been challenges with the food supply, food banks have found it harder and harder to get donations of food from the private sector or even to purchase food. And so government food becomes that much more important. We also saw that in the early days of the pandemic, the government providing additional supports that came through food banks enabled us to really stave off a huge increase in food insecurity. And so that's why today we're calling on a government to really increase the support for SNAP to ensure, for TFAP to ensure that there are additional food support that's coming through to our state, to states, to our region, and across the country.
Thank you. And now I recognize Ranking Member Braun for 5 minutes.